Hello, my darlings. All right, let's go to America, shall we, and start with Paulie Krugman having a go at them Republican types. So what kind of politician can meet these basic GOP requirements? Earlier in the article, he'd explained that the Republican voter types demand of the Republican representative totally contradictory sorts of ideas. These are the only two ways to make the cut: to be totally cynical or to be totally clueless. In other words, anybody that's going to stand up and say to Republican voters what the Republican voters want, which is totally contradictory, would have to be someone who is totally cynical or totally clueless. The larger point, however, is that whoever finally gets the Republican nomination will be a deeply flawed candidate. And these flaws won't be an accident, the result of bad luck regarding who chose to make a run this time round. The fact that the party is committed to demonstrably false beliefs means that only fakers or the befuddled can get through the selection process. And let's admit the selection process is a bit odd as well, but it's just normal people in normal life demanding contradictory things of their politicians. And Paulie's probably quite right to say that only fakers or befuddled can get through the selection process, because you can't tell your potential voters that they are demanding contradictory things. You just have to either lie to them or just not understand that they're contradictory things. Anyway, let's move on to Bloomberg, and Bloomberg News responds to Bernanke's criticism. I suppose you will have come across this in the news in one way, that Bloomberg got information out of the Fed, so made a big hoo-ha out of it. The Fed has responded by saying, look, Bloomberg, you've really got it wrong, and Bloomberg are coming back here and saying, oh no, we haven't got it wrong. And Jon Stewart on the weekly show, daily show, did a very amusing thing on it. But I'll just say, save reading this, that what I've looked into of it, you would be better off listening to the Fed about what they did. They seem to get a better handle on it than either Bloomberg or Stewart on the Daily Show. I'll leave it there because it is slightly complicated and there are many grey areas, but basically Bloomberg have overblown this, and the Daily Show is not the place to get economic news from. And we'll hop over the pond and find an even, well, a similar sort of argument going on between different peoples. This chart, put up by a couple of professors in a paper and backed up by the Financial Times Alphaville and many other people, saying that Germany, this is target 2 again, Germany is running out of assets to be able to get enough money together to counterbalance what the pigs' central banks have been spending on their banks. Now again, let's just go on to another chart from the same paper. And this is, again, has been represented all across the interwebs, and it's being argued about assets of the Bundesbank. In the blue line going down, as you can see, as the red spotty line goes up, which is loans to the Euro system, with France on the other side as well, there with the pigs, as in money's going out of France. And the central, it's target 2. I've explained it once or twice before. It'll take too long to go right to the basis of it, like the Bloomberg article. But basically, again, unfortunately for the people that did this article, then they are basically wrong. And when they say things like the Bundesbank is running out of assets and might have to sell its gold, that's the yellow spotty line there, they are basically wrong. And what is happening is that as the money is coming from the Eurozone into Germany, the Bundesbank, that blue line, is not really assets of the bank, the Bundesbank as it says at the top. It's loans to financial institutions. And as more money is coming into Germany, the Bundesbank has to make less loans to the banks because they're awash with other nations' funds. And many other complications, but basically if you hear anything that is sounds a bit wild, tend on the side that the wildness is wrong. Moving on again, so many of these things are grey areas, complicated, and let's move on. Europe, lawyers plan for possible Eurozone breakup. Now, this is the sort of thing, it's grey, but it's actually happening. All sorts of law firms and other experts, considered experts in the field, are being asked to draw up plans for a breakup of the euro for various companies. They've got to do their planning for this, and they are doing it. It's just moving towards, this is a reality of what's happening. It doesn't mean the Eurozone's breaking up, but sensible people are planning for it. RTE News in Ireland actually has done a little one. How would my finances change if the euro collapsed? Few in power will publicly countenance its demise, but here we sketch out what would happen to household finances if the euro collapsed and Ireland had to go it alone financially. And it's not a bad little article. But if you can remember that this sort of thing even 1 month ago was not anywhere in the headlines at all, but now it is all over the place, and there's good reason for it. And this is one of the good reasons for it, besides the fact that the Merkozy clown is dancing and getting applause for doing some strange performance art that's got absolutely nothing to do with the reality of this, which is over on the right, Eurozone gross sovereign funding needs, green, mauve and beige, which is 2012, 13, 14, and the first country, Italy, with a very, very big green bar. Spain next, with very large funding needs in 2012. And over on the left are the months of 2012 of when these funding needs are coming due. And the one that's really troubling the markets is February, March and April, those green bars, which are funding that Italy will need. And it's 40, 40, 30, so it's 110 billion. And I think people know that unless something strange happens, the market will not be providing that funding at a good interest rate for Italy. So somehow the euro superpower people, clowns, have got to get something together to plug that February, March, April gap for Italy. And the reason Italy will not get the money from the markets is this. It's a simple little chart, but it's quite informative. Along the bottom, change in consensus 2012 GDP forecast since June. In other words, they had a certain forecast for how the GDP of these countries mentioned was going to be back 6 months ago and what it is now. And as you can see, Ireland haven't dropped back far, as in the GDP is just roughly what they thought it would be 6 months ago. The US, UK, Germany, France and Spain in the middle there have dropped back about 0.5% to 1%, but Italy are closer towards dropping back 1.5% less GDP than they predicted 6 months ago. And it's this falling back of GDP, lack of growth, that's really affecting the market and their intentions to buy Italian bonds at any sort of decent interest rate, because no growth means big problems. The Guardian in the UK, how will Britain cope with its lost decade? Well, take a look at Japan. Standard stuff. Aditya Chakraborty gives us this article, and it's reasonably nicely written. In the past week, the UK has received two of the worst bits of news it's possible for any major economy to get in peacetime. First, the Office for Budget Responsibility believes that the British economy is around 13% smaller than the government assumed at the height of the boom. That's quite a drop. Second, the Institute for Fiscal Studies forecasts that the average British family will be poorer in 2016 than they were in 2002. A lost decade, and then some, beckons. Now, I've touched on this before, and they're talking right there at the end there. The beckons is kind of exclamation mark, as in from here, 2011, there's still 5 years to go to 2016, and they've already penciled those 5 years in, penned, in fact, they've penned in those next 5 years to be very bad indeed. So if these very optimistic type people agree to pen in 5 very bad years coming, you can imagine how bad it actually could be. Later in the article we get each, because in this article the Chakraborty chap went to see the Japanese people and asked them, well, how was it in your lost decades? Each dignitary would start with the same story, how the economy had pretty much flatlined ever since the property bubble popped at the start of the 90s, how their own incomes had not gone up at all for over a decade, but they rarely dwelled on the figures, talking instead about how the two lost decades had penetrated into every corner of social life. Yoshiyasu Ono, head of the Cabinet's Economic Research Institute, pointed out that the suicide rate, always high in Japan, had doubled as more middle-aged salarymen took their own lives. Others pointed out that the young now had to take on temporary jobs with less money and security, and so were marrying later, where youngsters once knuckled down in the hope of a lifetime position at Toyota or Fujitsu. Diminished prospects prompted them into a very Japanese form of subversion, wearing outlandish clothes and pink hair dye. In Britain, where 1 in 5 young people are already locked out of the labour market, such persistent frustration is unlikely to breed cute non-conformity. It's hardly fanciful to see how it might lead to reruns of the kind of carnival of destruction seen this summer, and it's really not. The young are naturally rebellious and don't want to go into this conformity crap because they're naturally free spirits, and to go into the conformity crap they must have quite large carrots dangled before them, and the authorities are running out of carrots and seemingly having to resort to sticks, and that is not going to work. Guardian again, former US economy czar, warns Britain risks catching the US disease. They're having a chat here with Jared Bernstein, Randeep Ramesh is anyway, and putting forward this reasonable article as well, where we get a quote, "One has to worry in a case like this that conservative forces will use the recession-inflated budget deficit as an excuse to slash programs that have been gunning for years." That's Bernstein talking about the UK. The way for the US and the UK to lift the wages of ordinary people, he argues, Bernstein, is to get unemployment down. Without trade unions able to bargain their way to better wages in private companies, which they're not going to get in UK or US, workers need low unemployment, because only under these conditions employers bid up wages to get and keep workers they need. Absolutely fact. On a more fundamental level, Bernstein says that the free market economies of the US and Britain need to accept that governments can intervene and get it right. He points to Germany and Sweden, for example, where broad-based economic success is built on a partnership between different sections of society. Kind of what I've been angling with for this week, or about this week, that the amount of government intervention in economies is a major line of thought, but unfortunately it's so often really very prismatic, as it is in this Bernstein thing, and it's your political suasion that tells you what to say on the subject, as opposed to what might be best for your country at any particular time. Europe, the Kremlin targeted by election protests. About 6,000 protesters took to the streets of Moscow on Monday in one of the biggest political demonstrations in years, amid accusations that the Kremlin's ruling party relied on widespread fraud to secure parliamentary majority. And in the body of the article we get Amnesty International meanwhile condemned the detainment of peaceful protesters after more than 300 opposition activists and bystanders were reportedly arrested by police across Russia. That sort of intervention that we don't really want to have. Some of the more questionable voting for United Russia, that's Putin's outfit, came from warlord-run regions such as the North Caucasus. Vote tallies showed 99.5% of the Chechens and 91% of the Dagestanis voted for United Russia. And meanwhile, more than 90% of patients in mental hospitals did the same. I'll leave it there. Bye.